All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So, hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for CGAP's webinar on API pricing for digital financial service providers. My name is Claudia McKay with CGAP, and I will be the moderator for today's session. Thank you again for joining us for what I hope will be an interesting and informative webinar. Before we get started, I want to briefly give you a few logistics pointers and then introduce you to our speakers today and then walk through the agenda with you. So firstly, this is an audio broadcast and attendees' microphones will remain muted throughout the webinar. But we really welcome your comments and questions throughout the webinar, so please do engage by using the chat box, which you can find on the right-hand side of your WebEx window. You can submit your questions at any time during the webinar while people are speaking as questions come to mind. You do not need to wait for the Q&A part of the agenda to do this. Number 3, to ensure that your questions are seen, please make sure that you select all participants when sending your questions. And finally, we will be recording this webinar and emailing it to all the attendees along with the presentation. I am very pleased to be joined today by some experts on the topic of pricing for APIs. And with us today are my colleague Michelle Hanouche from CGAP, Martin Janssen from the global strategy consulting firm Simon-Kucher, and Cédric Onguesson from MTN. For our agenda today, after I've completed some basic introductory material, Michelle is going to share with us the 3 goals of an API pricing strategy that are relevant for DFS providers. This is drawn from pricing work that CGAP has done over the past year with several of our DFS partners. Michelle will share with us some highlights, and if you're interested in more details, you can read more in our recent publication on API pricing. Next, we'll hear some pricing advice from Martin, who led Simon-Kucher's strategic pricing work that CGAP undertook with our partners. And then Cédric from MTN will share with us his perspective, putting all this advice into action and actually developing a strategy for MTN Uganda's open APIs, which were launched in November of last year. And finally, we'll leave about 15 minutes at the end for questions. But just a reminder to be submitting your questions as we go along and don't necessarily wait for this slot in the presentation. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start with a quick overview of why CGAP believes that open APIs are important for digital financial services. So what we've seen is that on the one hand, you've got large DFS providers represented here on the left-hand side by the mobile phone and lots of customers surrounding it. And these providers are really managing all the core operations of a DFS service, registering customers, managing a huge agent network, dealing with regulatory issues, tech issues, etc. They're not often best placed themselves to try and develop a full range of financial and non-financial products and services to suit customers with a host of diverse needs. On the other hand, there exists a range of third parties who are developing a wide range of products and services. And these are represented on the right-hand side of the slide. Many of these are small and nimble with innovative ideas ranging from leasing tractors to Paygo Solar to education loans and savings products. And they may have great products, but they need a way to access customers and a platform with which to get paid and do other types of transactions. So traditionally, integration between these large DFS providers and these third parties has been one-off and complex, making it expensive and time-consuming. Everything needed to be developed and negotiated from scratch, including pricing, and the result was inconsistent and opaque terms and conditions. So DFS providers, understandably, have often prioritized integrations with just a handful of large partners with a clear business case where profits outweigh the high cost or capacity of one-off integrations. But increasingly, many providers are thinking about or are starting to use an open API approach to adopt kind of a payments as a platform approach. And these providers don't want to just provide access to an account, but to a full suite of services, many of which are provided by these third parties. So we see here 2 DFS providers, an MNO and a bank, each connected to each other and to many third parties and many customers. Open APIs allow these connections to be done almost seamlessly in a self-service way by developers with transparent and consistent conditions on a range of items, including, of course, pricing. So we think that the result will be a highly interconnected ecosystem where a variety of players leverage each other's assets to develop and deliver a diverse range of financial and non-financial solutions to customers. And this should lead, or CGAP believes that this will lead to not only more customers entering this interconnected ecosystem, but also each customer being much more active and accessing more use cases. So for the past 18 months or so, CGAP has been working with 5 DFS providers to support them on the journey of opening APIs and learning alongside them what it really takes to do this well. And of course, sharing a lot of this with our CGAP audience. So you can see here our 5 partners, and we've selected them to provide a range of geographies in Africa and Asia, different institution types, banks and non-banks, and different strategic focuses of their open API work. We are providing them with a range of support, including strategic, technical, and operational guidance. And one of the topics where we mutually felt we needed to learn more was pricing. So we worked with Simon Kucher to provide this pricing expertise to several of our partners, including MTN. So before I hand over to Michelle, I just want to emphasize one point, which is that one of the lessons we've really learned over the past 18 months is that while it may be tempting to think of open APIs as just a tech issue, doing this well really requires changing your mindset from a quick fix IT integration to a full product development process, considering elements like user experience and design, pricing, who your target market is, how you're going to market this to them, and many other factors. So pricing is one of these critical elements to get right. It's not the only one, but it's much more than just the technology aspect. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Michelle, who will now take you through the 3 goals of an API pricing strategy.
Thanks, Claudia. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. So the first, so as Claudia mentioned, we've kind of identified 3 goals of a successful API pricing strategy, and I'll just talk you through those pretty quickly before handing over to Martin and Cedric. The first one is just to help the DFS provider achieve a specific business objective, and I'll talk to each of these in a little bit more detail in a minute. The second one is around generating business value for each of the target users of these APIs, so the businesses that are making use of these APIs. And then the third one is just kind of understanding the pricing norms for the APIs that you're opening and making sure that you're either kind of aligning with those or you are modifying expectations successfully amongst your target users. So just digging into goal 1 and expanding a little bit further, every API that you open up as a DFS provider will have a specific objective. So whether that is to increase innovation, add use cases, grow your ecosystem, or purely to drive revenue, your pricing strategy needs to support that. So for example, if you open up a merchant payment API and your objective is to increase your acceptance network and increase customer usage, then the pricing kind of implication of that would be to make sure that you don't add additional costs to those third parties that you're wanting to make use of this merchant payment API. And I think this kind of leads us to an important point is best provider by opening, giving a new way to reach an existing product or service, as would be the case with merchant payments. So in this instance, it then becomes important not just what the price is for the API itself, but also what the relative price is of accessing the merchant payment via the API versus your kind of traditional method. So, for example, answering the question, do you want to give a discounted rate on the merchant payment, or do you want to kind of just make the API free and leave the traditional pricing in place? So I'd recommend those people with a bit of time looking into this, take a look at Paytm's websites and how they kind of price differentiate between kind of standalone small businesses on the one hand, and then kind of increase the pricing as they go through to large enterprises, and how they kind of think about that differentiation and while still giving access to the smaller players as well. And then kind of by contrast, if you are opening APIs such as a data API or a credit score API with the objective of monetizing an underutilized digital asset, in that instance, you'd want to make sure that you're earning direct revenue from this. So I think in that way, you take kind of a different approach to how you think about the pricing for the specific API. And I'll get into a few different types of APIs a bit later. So that's the first goal. The second goal is around generating business value for each of these third-party API consumers. So as I mentioned, the businesses that are making use of these. And the first point to make here is that the first step there is to segment between the different types of users. So what you'll see on the slide now is 4 segments that CGAP came up with. So what we call creators, enhancers, aggregators, and efficiency drivers. And these are 4 that we came up with. Obviously, in different markets, there'd be different segments that you might want to focus on. But the point is really to try and understand the needs, the kind of how your APIs add value for each of these different segments, what their expectations are, and then also what their willingness to pay is likely to be. So, for example, if we dig into creators, and here we're talking about innovators that maybe don't have a product yet, but are using your APIs to develop a new product and are still testing that product out with the target segment, trying to create this product market fix, trying to figure out their business model still. It's important to then leave space with them for them to innovate, to experiment without excessive cost pressures. So often you'll see space created either for free usage of that API or kind of a minimal fees so that they can still experiment and test. And we put M-Corpo Solar here, but that would really be M-Corpo in the early days. So not the business more established that you see today, but kind of early on while they're still experimenting and trying to figure out the business model. By contrast, if we go either to the enhancers or the efficiency drivers, I think when we talk about enhancers, we mean a company with an existing product or service that uses your API to improve the value proposition for customers. So either it's using your data APIs to better credit score that customer, or it's using your payment APIs to give those customers a better way to make their payment to you. So whatever it is, it's enhancing the product, but it's doing so immediately. So that business should be getting value out of your APIs straight away. And similarly, efficiency drivers are using your APIs to cut down internal costs. So for example, there is Save the Children Fund and was having excessive costs trying to pay their remote workforce, and made use of Bionic's API and significantly cut down costs. So in both of those examples, you'd find a higher willingness to pay and an ability to price earlier on than you would with the creator segment. And that's just kind of trying to stress the point that you need to understand where they're coming from, how they're getting value from it, and then feed that into your pricing strategy. Lastly, on this one, you might be wondering how we have an aggregator segment in here when one of the main objectives of open APIs is so that you can go, third parties can connect directly to you, and you make it a self-service proposition and as easy as possible. There's 2 reasons why you might still target aggregators. So the first one is often aggregators kind of go one step further, so they might have a value-added service that you wouldn't offer yourself. So, for example, if we think of Kopo in Kenya and their merchant lending product, that might be one example of offering services, merchants in this case, to go via them rather than directly to Safaricom. There could also be, the service levels or other something else. Then the other main point I wanted to mention is some businesses may just, for technical reasons, prefer to outsource this integration. So you might always have this segment of third parties that prefer to go through aggregators. And then it becomes important to understand that and how do you think about aggregator as a customer, because effectively they're still growing your ecosystem on your behalf. And so from a pricing perspective, it becomes important to have some kind of incentive for them to do so. So whether it's a revenue share or something similar to that. So for example, in the merchant payment space, it might be sharing that merchant discount rate between yourself and that aggregator. And then in that instance, and I think Martin can speak a little bit around this, but the question becomes, how do you make it easier for these third parties to self-select the pricing that makes most sense for them and makes most sense for you? So with aggregators, one option is to put in place a barrier to entry, so an integration fee, so that only true aggregators that are bringing and growing your ecosystem will get access to that revenue share, which is effectively a good discount. So that's the second goal. And then the third goal, briefly, is to align with or successfully modify market expectations. And again, there's just open APIs, particularly in the DFS space, is relatively new. So we don't need to, it's not always a lot of examples, but we have done a little bit of work which firstly kind of shows the main types of APIs that people are seeing. So we've identified 4 types of APIs. The movement of money, so either helping people get paid or helping businesses make payments. Data APIs is the second category, so either individual level data like credit scores or the raw transaction data, balance information, things like that. But also aggregated insight information, so whether that's for fraud detection or whether that's insight information. So there's a number of different types of data APIs available. And then also the third category around ecosystem expansion, so giving third parties the ability to create accounts, ability to originate loans, things like that. And then lastly around KYC, identity and consent APIs. So those are the 4 categories, and we've got a blog, so I won't go into that in more detail. But the main point is just to understand this kind of what the norms are, what expectations are, and you can see. So for example, if you are using a help me get paid API, so like a merchant payment API, a bill payment API, you would expect that there'd be a transactional percentage of the transaction value charged on top of that API. That would be the norm that we'd see in the market today. Similarly, for a credit score API, you'd often find a fee per API call, and that would be similar for a KYC API. And then for a ecosystem expansion, as I said earlier, that typically if there's a third party helping you grow your ecosystem, there'd be some kind of a revenue share. So the third party's getting paid in essence. And then the last point to make on this, and again we can ask Martin to share a little bit more on this, is at some point, these are the types of fees you might charge if it's on a standalone basis. But there is also the option to start bundling. So you might have, for example, a API package that is targeted towards digital lenders, and there you might want to bundle something like a KYC API together with a payment API and a credit score API, and even maybe some messaging APIs as an MNO. So then you start to think about things differently, and how do the bundling of those APIs then change your pricing package. So that would be another kind of one step further to consider. But I think at this stage, let me hand over to Martin. And Martin, maybe you can kind of take them through a little bit of the process, and then we'll get ask Cedric to give his experience from Uganda. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Michelle and Claudia. All right, so this is Martin from CGAP Partners. We can go directly to the next slide. I want to guide you a little bit through our framework, how we usually approach pricing for APIs, be it single APIs or be it actually new developed API platforms where FS providers expose a set of different types of APIs, like Michelle just mentioned. And we came up with this pricing framework, which is it should actually be quite simple, but the steps in it are quite important. So starts off with the pricing strategy, then goes into a little bit market intelligence, and then we look into the pricing itself, into the price optimization. One thing we always say as pricing consultants, not pricing only APIs, but many other goods in the markets, is you have to price before product. One of the key things is to understand really the willingness to pay for the services you actually offer. And this is for, in many instances, companies don't think about this question anymore in detail because there is already an existing market price and they benchmark it against existing products. However, the challenge with APIs is very often there's no other benchmark in the market where consumers are already used to specific price levels or even price models. Hence, it's very important to understand also the value you deliver with your APIs and the willingness to pay before you actually start finalizing the product itself. We come to this a little bit later, step by step. So it usually always starts with a pricing strategy. In the pricing strategy, the initial question is definitely what is your underlying commercial model? What do you want to achieve with your APIs? Is it simply, do you want to simply expand your sales channel, or do you want to create a marketplace where you expose your APIs, where you let other FS players actually expose their APIs? And what is really the commercial goal you want to achieve? Sometimes we speak with the REST players and they say the APIs for us is only a way of an easier integration, and we want to scale up our product usage. This is, of course, a completely different setup from some companies who say, actually, no, our APIs are our main revenue source. So it's very important for yourself to understand as a company, first of all, what is the underlying commercial model, and to align this also with the corporate strategy, what you really want to achieve. Once you know this, we usually define then with companies together their pricing goals. And pricing goals are things like, do you rather want to go for a direct monetization or an indirect monetization? The direct monetization is if you simply put a price tag on, for example, the data usage, what Michelle just described, for an API call, or for any other underlying good where you just put a direct price tag on it. However, this is not the only way to monetize APIs and to monetize the value you offer. There's a lot of opportunities in also indirect monetization where you use other price models, and we come to this a little bit later, where you don't put a direct price tag on your APIs, on the consumption of the APIs, but you monetize them indirectly. And once you have defined your pricing goals, once you have defined then also the pricing principles, do you want to charge, for example, is every customer for you the same? Are all customers equal? Do you want to charge everyone the same, or do you want to have tiered pricing? Do you want to give incentives in your price model for a higher usage? Then you look more into the market. So what is actually the market? What are the market characteristics where you expose your APIs? And one of the most important questions which we've seen, especially in the FS sector, is actually the question about the value chain. Because in some instances, when a company starts exposing APIs on their platform, the whole value chain actually changes in the market. We had this, for example, in one project where there was originally merchants only had to go through the very tedious process in connecting directly to an FS provider in order to accept transactions. And they had to go and find their own developers who create actually the connection to the APIs. So basically, the direct connection was always between a merchant and the FS provider, and the merchant had to go and find a developer. However, once we started actually exposing APIs through a platform, this value chain changed, that the developer community became actually a direct customer of the FS provider. If this is the case, if you change the existing value chain, it has definitely very important implications on your overall pricing, because when you price a new service in a new value chain, you have to consider actually the willingness to pay of the end customer. You have to consider the willingness to pay of your direct customer, and then figure out a pricing model that works actually for all players along the value chain. So the deep dive into the value chain is actually crucial, and this is especially important that the consumer segment for APIs can be very, very diverse. As Michelle already mentioned, it can be that the consumer of an API is a developer. It can be that the consumer of the API is a fintech. It can be a bank. It can be another telco, or it can be a small merchant. And all of these different players, they have different needs, different willingness to pay, and different objectives how to use these APIs. So to understand who is your consumer is actually crucial. Who's really the consumer of your API? And it has very important implications for the pricing model, because very often one-size-fits-all pricing models won't work. If you have a very diverse customer group, most probably it makes sense to either differentiate your pricing with a differentiation like a bronze, silver, gold differentiation in terms of the vertical price differentiation, where you add more values and increase actually the pricing, or as Michelle already mentioned, you move into bundling, where you combine different APIs together and sell them as a bundle. And there's actually other price models which are very, very relevant for APIs, which is subscription models to API platforms, etc. To understand your consumer base is actually crucial to determine also what is the right price model. So if you understand your consumer segment, you definitely it's good to know, it's good to have an understanding of what your internal cost. However, we from Simon-Kucher, we wouldn't price APIs in a cost plus basis. We don't look at the cost and then add a margin and say this is the price. We always come from the value perception in the market, from the willingness to pay. We measure the willingness to pay, and the cost, the internal cost, is good to know for strategic decision, but it doesn't have a direct impact on the pricing itself. When it comes to the pricing, to define the overall value proposition, this is the first step. And value proposition is it's actually a very important point, because even in APIs, the thing you want to sell to a customer is not only the API itself. There's much more around it. There's different features. It might be security features. It might be features around accessibility. There's different services you can offer to your API consumers. Services. There's different SLA, service level agreements, etc. So there's a lot more you can offer to your consumers around your APIs itself. And sometimes these are actually the biggest value drivers and not the API itself. So to have a clear, to formulate a holistic value proposition is definitely makes pricing much, much easier, because you have actually a bigger base where you can put a price tag on. Then the next steps would be then define the right price model, but we can come to this a little bit later, actually, in one of the next slides. So if we just have 1 minute on the pricing strategy, again, this is just listed a few different directions what people or what FS players chose to go for. One is either you just look for a new sales channel. Some players say we actually don't want to monetize our APIs. Our key target is to increase our innovation and to leverage external innovation to increase our fintech cooperation, which is of course a completely different way of looking at the overall pricing model for an API. Some companies say we want to monetize something which we haven't monetized yet. Very often it's their own data. Or there's even the most advanced way of monetizing APIs is exposing them in a platform and then actually selling not only one API, but actually exposing a complete API suite and offering different bundles and different subscription models for users. When we come to the pricing itself, we always say how you charge is actually more important than what you charge. And Michelle mentioned this already a bit. For different types of APIs, there's traditionally seen different types of price models, and this is actually very important because it's all about what is the value you deliver to your customers. And very important, this is not only dependent on the type of API you have, but also it depends also on the consumer who's using your API. Different consumers might use your API for different purposes and hence have a completely different willingness to pay. And if the revenue model, the commercial model of your consumer is transaction-based, it makes sense for them that your price model is also transaction-based, because this is very easy for them to scale. However, if you choose a price model that doesn't fit the commercial model of your consumers, most probably you won't reach scale, because they don't see really the business sense behind it. So to define what is the right price metric, be it per API call, be it per transaction, be it for packages that you actually start packaging APIs and price them as bundling fees, as good, better, best solutions, all you can eat solutions, or even just price subscription fees for a platform. To determine this is, from our perspective, more important than the exact price you put on it, because this will be reflected directly also in how your consumer perceives the value you deliver to them. Once you have determined the right price model and price metric, one of the key questions is, of course, how much should we now charge for it? So we determined now that we're priced per call, so how much should we charge? How much should we charge per call? And there's different types of methods you can use to determine the exact pricing. It can be through price experiments, through market data, through surveys, through indirect surveys. So there's different types of methodologies you can use to understand the willingness to pay of your consumers. But we definitely recommend to use not only one, but to use a couple of them and to speak also in focus groups and in with other methodologies to communicate with your API consumers and understand what is their commercial model, what is their willingness to pay for different types of APIs. And there's a lot of methodologies out there which you can very easily use to collect these kind of data. And the last step, one of the big changes from API to many other price models is for APIs we usually don't speak about the price model anymore. For APIs we usually speak about the pricing journey, because most of the APIs they are built for scale, and if you speak to FS companies, they say one of the biggest goals, of course, is to get a wide market reach. And then you always have the trade-off between, okay, if we put a high price in the beginning, we won't scale fast. However, if our price is too low in the beginning, we have the problem of missing profitability, and we can't invest actually in scaling quick enough. So it's actually crucial to not only look into the timing now, what are your customers willing to pay now for the API, but actually to developing a pricing journey. What is the right price model now from in the growth phase, and what is actually the right price model when you reach a maturity phase, and how do you get from the initial price model, how can you actually scale up to the more mature price model? So this is in a few slides just our approach, how we price APIs and how we help other companies do this. And I think I'll hand over now to Cedric. He will have a lot of practical implications, also how MTN in Uganda did this.
Just briefly, before we move to Cedric, just a reminder to please start entering any of your questions that you have on the chat box on the right-hand corner, so that after Cedric is done, then we have a couple of questions to start with going into our Q&A. All right, over to you, Cedric.
Okay. Hi, everyone. And thank you, Claudia and Michel, for the introduction and for the opportunity. So I will start with just introducing MTN for those who don't know us. So we are a mobile network operator, and this is what we've done over over the past 20 years. And we are operating as a mobile operator in 21 countries. 10 years ago, we launched what we called mobile money, and today in one country, it was in Uganda, and today we operate as a fintech operator in 14 countries. We have 27 million active customers across our footprint, and we offer a range of fintech services to consumers and business, from P2P to payments and through facilitating many other financial services. I think Claudia mentioned it before, we launched our Open API program last year in October. And we had two main objectives in launching this API program. The first one was to facilitate partner integration. I think it was highlighted before, that, and it is true, before we had our Open API program in Uganda, it used to take probably 6 months to integrate a new partner between contracting, setting up connectivity, exchanging documentation on APIs, and so on and so on. And our objective was to reduce it. Still our objective, we have not achieved it yet, but to 24 hours for someone who is very comfortable with our APIs. The second one was to drive innovation. And again, it was mentioned earlier, we appreciate that it's impossible for us to resolve all use cases. It's impossible for us to go into every business vertical, but we recognize that we've now built a platform that is at scale, and we really encourage businesses, developers to come and leverage what we've done to disrupt, many business and many verticals in our market. The second component of the Open API program is the scope. So what we've actually done over the past few years in scaling up our mobile money business is that we've built a payment platform with consumers and merchants and processes and front end and so on and so on. And so what we started with is to offer payment as a service. But payment as a service, it's a word we use in many contexts, but it can mean many things from actual service perspective. For us, payment means I can collect money by sending a request payment to a consumer. It also means I can disburse money to our consumers. I can disburse money and collect money with another business. And payments also means in the context of a disbursement, for example, if you combine it with some light KYC information and a partner who is licensed to do so, it can also mean terminating a remittance. So we've created 4 products around it. So we have a product that we call Collection. Collection is for a business that wants to collect a payment and request a payment from a business or a consumer. We have Disbursement. It's a service that enables a business to send money to another business or to send money to a consumer. We have a product that is called Remittance, which is a combination of our disbursement product, but with some small add-ons around, checking a customer KYC, not a full KYC, but just checking his age, this type of things. And then we have what we call our MomoPay product, which is more for e-commerces who want to accept payments from mobile money consumers. So when it comes to the pricing, the second scope of our Open API platform is also to enable business to open an account on our platform. Because, of course, there is the technical part, but also for us, we wanted it to translate into business. So as you explore our API and understand the capability, you can open an account and then move to production. And that's why we launched it in Uganda first, with planning to launch in many more countries over the next few months. So when it comes to pricing, we've adopted 3 principles. And the first one was to drive innovation and to reduce barrier. And this translated into simply making it free to access the API and access the documentation and make it extremely simple and make it free to try the APIs in our sandbox. The second principle we've adopted is simplicity. For us, simplicity means that you pay when you are in production, when you are actually executing a transaction, and that we take a percentage or a flat fee of the transaction. But it's in our production environment. When you have an account, and when you actually use the service to do business. And the third one is adaptability, and it's quite linked to the second one. But so as I said, we are operating in 14 countries, and we needed to have a pricing principle that can apply across our markets with different rates, but with the same pricing guidance. So those are the principle we've applied for pricing. My last comments are more one on the implementation journey, and I think one of the key learnings that we had as we implemented was don't make it too scientific, because it's already very complex enough to transform your business and open your business to new customers, to look at the legal aspect, of opening your business, to engage with the developer community and so on and so on. And that's enough work for one to focus on, rather than trying to actually revisit, our pricing on our existing business. So our approach was just to say, look, we are looking at driving innovation, so let's make this free. And we have an existing business that is expected to expand with this initiative, and so we just adopt the same principle. And I think the result of that, from an implementation perspective, is that we had so many challenges after actually opening the Open API platform, but pricing was not one of the challenges. We never had any of the developer or business questioning our pricing, because this was an accepted pricing, and this was something everybody understood even before we moved to that platform. I think in terms of the evolution, the way we see it is we will continue to package API or features and functionality all together. We'll probably continue pricing on a per transaction basis. However, what we see more, and it's probably very specific to our markets for now, but what we discover is the developer community that we have around us needs a lot of support. And there are businesses also that need support. So we are looking at, working with aggregators or enabling a supporting framework around our API framework that may come or not at a premium for those who engage with us. But for now, we are on the learning journey. I like the concept that was mentioned earlier. It's really a journey, and we are just at the beginning of it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much to Cedric. That is fantastic to hear that of all the challenges, which I'm sure you're going through in opening the APIs, that pricing has actually ended up being, because it was so simple, not one that the developers have questions about or get confused about. And thank you also to Martin and Michelle for a very informative presentation. So we've got a couple of questions starting to trickle in, so we'll start with those, and please continue to keep them coming. So the first question is actually back to Cedric, and that is from Shweta, who has asked, how many developers do you have on your API program, and what incentive or reward program did you run to increase your developer merchant partner base? So this is also, I think, not just pricing, but around how you're kind of engaging with the third parties to kind of increase the base who are using the APIs.
Okay, so we have over 1,000 developers registered onto our platform, and MTN Uganda, to engage with the developer community, did a developer challenge. So we actually selected a few weeks ago 9 developers, or 9 teams actually of developers who have met the criteria we fixed for the challenge. So we've given 3, let's say 3 scopes. One was around resolving or digitizing payments within the FMCG value chain. One was around the hotel, restaurant, and cafe sort of booking. experience, and one was around transport, because we figured those are very complex use case to resolve, and so it was interesting for us to see, how the developer community and the market was thinking about resolving these issues. We are now working with this company to implement their business and plug them into our platform and work with them in scaling them.
Great, thanks. And that's actually one of the next topics that CGAP is going to be doing more work on in the coming months in terms of third-party engagement. So stay tuned. We'll probably have a webinar on the topic at some point in the coming months where we can drill down specifically on that question. There was a question here around whether there's been any engagement with financial regulators or supervisors. So I don't know, Cedric, if for MTN Uganda, what kind of the engagement was, whether you had to inform the central bank about what you were doing or approval, or kind of what the process was. Or maybe we start with that, and then Martin, if you have any thoughts from working in markets, if usually they're kind of the financial regulators are involved, or to what extent.
So everything, we are operating a very regulated business, and so we do work very closely with regulators as we deploy new service and open new channels. That being said, for us, as you can understand, each of the services we are talking about, or actually we went live with for our Open API program, was existing services that was already falling within an approved regulatory framework. We did have to do some compliance check and background to ensure that, for example, our platform is meeting regulation around data protection and security and so on and so on, and data sovereignty, for example. So we did have to go through the journey, and it's an important point, as we deploy and expand our Open API platform. And so we are very careful about it, and it's important for us.
I agree with you. We observe exactly the same thing. So what Cedric said, if the underlying service which you're providing through an API is regulated, then you have to work with the regulator. But so far, we haven't seen a specific regulation for API pricing itself. There's a lot of regulation around the documentations, etc. And these rules, what Cedric just mentioned, but for the pricing itself of an API, we haven't come across around this particular regulation.
Great, thanks to both of you. So one question that just came in is that a lot of the discussion is around API pricing for large bank financial service providers and telcos. Maybe this would be more for Martin or maybe Michelle. Can one of you comment on, sorry, I've just lost it, how smaller fintechs can appropriately price API calls when proposing to work with big banks and telco companies? So I guess from their side, kind of what would be the pricing strategy or pricing negotiation that would go into it? Could maybe Martin or Michelle, do you have a perspective on that?
Yeah, sure. We work also with a lot of fintechs actually who have their who want to price their APIs, and fintechs can be it's a very wide fintechs can be very different. Actually, we have Stripe, of course, who we have with setting their prices for their APIs, and they're actually smaller startups who just started a small service. However, from an approach, there's actually no difference how to approach this. The most important thing is that these fintechs then, first of all, evaluate what is the value they deliver to the banks. And they have to understand in detail what is the commercial model of the banks, what are they going to do with the input you deliver them. And if you fully understand the value you deliver, it makes it much easier also to determine the willingness to pay for these values. And then again, it's crucial to have the right price metrics, how you charge before you actually what you charge. So think about the right price model, be it for an per API call, be it per API service for transaction, be it for a subscription model. This is actually crucial to determine that. But the approach is exactly the same for small fintechs as for large fintechs or for other FS players.
Great, thank you. Good. So one more question here is around how do you price when users are developers? So I think that probably is around, thinking about users as kind of individual developers, so not developers in kind of larger enterprises or businesses, but individuals who are kind of starting off creating, some sort of a product or service. So, I guess anyone who wants to chime in, did you consider that? Do you have some special kind of pricing to kind of encourage kind of users that are actually end developers or individual developers versus working within businesses or enterprises?
So while Martin and Cedric are thinking, I'll start us off. I think the one point to make is just, as I said earlier, just to give some room for experimentation. And I think Cedric also made this point around how you only get priced when you're in production. But even further than that, how you can kind of manage the pricing and reduce the cost burden for these startups as they still try and figure out their business model. So I think, as you're going into, these developers and thinking of, one or two people sitting in a garage creating a new business, I think that's one of the important things is just how to, reduce the burden while they try to innovate. And I think that feeds into, one of the other objectives we've heard come through here around wanting third parties to innovate and create additional use cases for your customers so that there's, increased, more useful and increased and more relevant use cases for them. So I think that, encouraging that by allowing them to innovate and giving them that room is quite important. Martin and Cedric, anything to add?
So Cedric here, I think on point. There is, for us at least, there is no price and no cost for developers. When a developer has finished exploring and innovating and is ready to become a businessman, that's where we are talking price and cost, and that's what we call moving into production. So that's exactly the approach we've adopted.
Great. Let's see, I've got one more question. So we've still got a few minutes left. So in case anyone has any last questions, you can go ahead and ask it. So this one, I guess, is probably most specifically to Cedric, but regarding version control and evolution of the APIs, how do you mitigate the impact of your API roadmap on consumers of your APIs that are already in production? So this is a little bit less specifically on pricing, but I guess as things are evolving, how do you mitigate that on consumers who've already kind of started the process and are, working on APIs that are in production? So I guess let's start with Cedric on that.
So it's not an easy question. So I think for us, first of all, our main focus now is to building new packages and enabling new capabilities. So over the next few months, we'll probably keep the same version, but just bundle them with new APIs, thus creating new API products. When it comes to how we are planning to evolve, what our plan is to ensure that we have backward capability. So just to explain, if we call our current version 1, we are going to expose version 2. Let our community and our partner knows that version 2 is available, and we will make sure that we will be available to support them in doing the change they require to adapt to version 2, if any, by the way. And so development is put towards ensuring that there is minimum number of change our partner needs to do, and then probably make version 1 not available anymore in certain timelines. And so in our mind, this API platform is very much owned by our business team. And so the point here I'm trying to make is that version 2 of one API will come with a greater business value for our partners. And so whatever change or upgrade they will need to do, we want that to come at a benefit for them, because we appreciate that changing or adapting, to our specification is coming at a cost.
Great, thank you. And you're right. Yeah, that wasn't necessarily an easy question. I think Michelle has one last question, and then we'll probably be wrapping up. So go ahead, Michelle. Do you want to ask a question?
Sure, Cedric. I think this is a version of a question that came through on the chat, and it's really about how do we think about kind of like flexibility on pricing. So, for example, if we look at Stripe's pricing, I think it's pretty standard, and then they kind of throw in a comment that says, custom pricing is available for large volumes or for unique business models, and they kind of encourage you to contact sales, and there's a separate process. The question I think relays a little bit around that. So, how do you think about how do third parties get around standard pricing if they think they've got the different business model that justifies something like that, or additional volumes?
Yeah, so volume is definitely one for those who are. Sorry, I thought I was muted. So volume is definitely one. We are in the part of our business is payments, and for those who are familiar with payments, yes, discount comes with volume. So we are very open to that, and we have planned for it. For the second point, we appreciate that there is, we want to drive innovation. And so, yes, we are open also to suggestion as innovative business models are being built. We have, our API platform as an email in every country, or you can contact our group business owner for this program to discuss about pricing and innovative model and so on and so on. So we are very, very, very open on that. Our belief, though, is, at least for that first phase, the service we offer are very, very, very straightforward and around payment as a service. So we try to keep them simple. We believe they are reasonable enough, to enable anyone to build around it.
Great, thanks, Cedric.
All right. Thanks very much. So there are a few last questions that have come in that I don't think we're going to have time to get to, but please, I encourage you to read our pricing paper. I'll show you the link in a second. Get in touch with us if you still don't have your questions answered. I think on the CGAP website, it should be pretty easy to figure out how to contact Michelle and myself. So for more information, if you haven't already, I encourage you to visit our collection of API resources. You can see the URL there, and basically all of our open API resources are on that collections page on the CGAP website. You can find the blogs, which are fairly quick reads on certain topics, and then deeper dive papers and decks to go in more detail on particular topics. The easiest way to kind of stay up to date is to sign up for our newsletter, and so every couple of months you'll get an email newsletter with kind of some of our latest thinking and publications and resources. So I encourage you to sign up for that. And then, of course, to download our API pricing paper, which kind of goes into more detail on all the things that we've discussed on the call today. And you can find that on the collections website. So I just wanted to thank each one of you for joining us today and for engaging with us and for your questions and being part of this webinar today. And most particularly, a huge thanks to our presenters for sharing their time and their expertise. As we said before, we will be emailing you a link to the full recording of the webinar, as well as the version of the deck that we presented today. So you'll be seeing that shortly. And I thank you again, and have a good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Good rest of your day, and thank you very much. Bye.